Glenn was a disgusting and ugly orphan boy who loved reading stories. One day, he came across a tale about a powerful magician facing off against a demon lord. The demon lord asked the magician why he fought so hard and strongly against him. The magician said he was fighting to protect something important to him. That's what gave him the strength to keep on fighting no matter what. So, the battle raged on, and the magician used some holy fire to finish off the demon lord, and that was that. As Glenn grew up, he wanted to be a magician just like the one in the story. He wanted to be a magician of justice. When he turned 15, he managed to join the kingdom's army and became the strongest mage with his invincible original spell. One day, Princess Harana was taken away by some evil mages. The queen fell into despair and begged Sistine to save the princess. Glenn managed to find the princess and save her from the present evildoers. The princess started to scream, but Glenn told her to be quiet, mentioning that there were still enemies around. Glenn promised to always protect her. There, he met his companion Sarah, who really loved his personality. But there was a problem. Glenn started to hate magic. He wanted to originally be someone who could help people, but the only thing he did was to dirty his hands with the blood of others. Despite his emotions, Sistine never gave up on his dream because Sarah was there to support him. Until one day, the two went on a mission, and she lost her life. Glenn couldn't protect her. From that moment, Glenn quit being a mage and ran away, returning to his adoptive mother's house, Celica, one of the strongest mages in the world. He freeloaded on her for a whole year, lying around and being a pathetic loser until Celica came up with a proposal. She wanted him to become a substitute teacher in a mage academy. He didn't want to do it, claiming he wasn't qualified, but Celica insisted and threatened to fry him up with her magic. She even made a hole in a house to show she meant it. Glenn got scared and finally agreed. A few days later, we find ourselves in Fight, a city in the Alano Empire. There's this girl named Rumia who goes to that magical school. One day, she sees an old man on the street who hurt his finger. She's a nice girl, so she goes over to help, using her healing magic. She fixes up the man's finger real good. He's so impressed and thanks her, saying how awesome she is. But here's the thing, using magic outside the school is a no-no. So she kind of playfully tells the man, "Hey, you gotta keep this a secret," and the man, with a playful wink, promises to do just that. One day, Rumia was walking to school, and her friend Sistine from the same academy joined her. They chatted about a professor who quit, and they were kind of worried about who their new teacher would be. As they strolled along, a boy came running and yelled at them to move out of the way. He was super scared he'd crash into them. Sistine, quick thinker that she was, used her magic shield to block him, but she sent him flying into the air, and he landed in a fountain. The girls rushed over to check on him, and to their relief, he popped out of the water and asked if they were okay. Now, on the roof of one of the academy's buildings, another girl was waiting for someone, but that someone was running late, and she was not happy about it. Back to Sistine and Rumia, they kept talking to the boy who'd bumped into them. He kept asking if they were okay, and then he dropped a kind of weird idea. He acted like it was their fault they bumped into him, and said they might get in trouble unless they made a deal with him. He started checking Rumia's height and all that, which made her uncomfortable, so Sistine used her magic shield again and sent him flying into the air once more. This guy was just too strange. Meanwhile, the whole school was wondering where the substitute teacher was. The class was waiting, getting more and more impatient because the class period was almost over. They were complaining and talking about filing a complaint with the student body because it was so unprofessional. But finally, the teacher showed up, and guess what? It was the same guy that Sistine and Rumia ran into earlier. He acted like he didn't know them and introduced himself as Glenn. He seemed super not interested in teaching and started talking about his hobbies, which Sistine found pretty boring. In class, the new teacher Glenn wrote on the board that the students should do self-study because he was too tired. He even laid his head on the table and fell asleep. The students were super surprised, especially Sistine, who wasn't going to let that slide. Meanwhile, another teacher who was worried about Glenn being late argued with the principal. He knew Glenn wasn't cut out for teaching the kind of students they had, and he said Glenn would just tell them to self-study, which is exactly what happened. Then the principal dropped a bombshell. Glenn didn't even have a teaching license. But the principal trusted a powerful professor at the academy named Celica, who had recommended Glenn. The teacher who was worried called Celica a witch as soon as she walked in. But she overheard him. She didn't care about being called a witch but didn't want anyone bad-mouthing Glenn. She scared him into taking back what he said, and he ran away stuttering an apology. Back in class, Glenn was trying to act like a teacher, but he wasn't taking it seriously. His handwriting was sloppy, and Sistine couldn't even read what he wrote, although Rumia didn't have any trouble. When a student asked about a spell translation, Glenn couldn't find it in the book and told her to figure it out herself. This made Sistine really mad, and she called Glenn out for being a bad teacher. He defended himself, saying he couldn't just make stuff up. Then the bell rang, and he left without giving them any homework or anything. The girls went to the locker rooms to change and get ready for their next class. Sistine was fuming about Glenn not taking things seriously, and Rumia was worried about her friend. Sistine needed some healing, so she jumped on Rumia's chest, and that made her a little less angry. Flynn got impatient and barged into the locker room while the girls were still changing. They screamed at him to get out, but he refused and wanted to talk about the cliché turn of events. He didn't want to be shamed for seeing them, and that made the girls kick him out and gave him a nosebleed. Later, Sistine sat by the window in the cafeteria and wondered why they canceled the class Glenn was supposed to teach just because he got hurt. She felt like she was wasting time when she should be learning about the mystery of Malaris, a castle in the sky, to fulfill her promise to her grandfather. Then Glenn showed up with his lunch tray, and Sistine was instantly mad. Rumia tried to start a conversation with Glenn about his food, but the tension was thick in the air. Glenn told her that eating was one of his favorite things, especially when he didn't have to cook the food himself. He described how delicious it tasted, and Sistine said she might try it one day. But Glenn was feeling generous and shared some of his food with her. She liked it a lot, and Glenn asked if it was all right. At first, Sistine acted all grumpy and said it was none of her business, but then she told him that she ate lightly because she didn't want to fall asleep during class. She added that since he was the one teaching, she didn't mind falling into a coma. This caught the attention of the students around them, and Glenn asked if Sistine had something to say to him. Before she could reply, he quickly shoved a spoonful of food into her mouth. After swallowing, he took some of her food from her plate, which made Sistine pretty mad. She wondered if he really called himself a teacher with such behavior, and he just said it was temporary. The next day in class, Glenn did the same old self-study thing. He just didn't want to teach. He was super lazy and had no interest in trying. The following days were no different. He seemed even less excited than before, like all he wanted was to get to class and take a nap on his desk. This really bummed out the students, and it totally frustrated Sistine. One day, Sistine had enough. She got up, all annoyed, and complained about Glenn's behavior. She said she came from a long line of nobles, and if she told her dad about this, he'd have Glenn fired. Well, Glenn surprised everyone. He took Sistine's hand and told her to go ahead and complain. He wanted to be fired. He never wanted to work at the school in the first place, but he couldn't quit because of Celica. He figured if he got fired, she wouldn't do anything to him, and he'd be out of a job just like he wanted. This made the students super curious, and Sistine didn't back down. She challenged Glenn to a magic duel right then and there. Education meant a lot to her because it was the path to solving the mystery of Malaris. She told Glenn that if she won, he had to change his ways, and she knew she'd win because he didn't respect magic at all. Glenn agreed, but he asked her if she'd be okay with his request if he won. It sounded kind of ominous. They took their duel outside, and all the students watched. Glenn said they'd only use shock magic, which is all about electricity. The students were wondering who would come out on top. Sistine gave herself a little pep talk to gain courage, and then she fired her first shot. It hit Glenn right on the mark, surprising everyone because they thought Glenn would be better. But Glenn acted like he gave her a chance on purpose. He tried to zap her back, but Sistine shocked him again and again. She asked if he couldn't cast the spell, and he pretended like he could but just wanted her to win. The students knew he was lying, but he acted like they were almost tied when she had zapped him 3 times, and he only got one on her. He even pretended like he never agreed to be a better teacher and just laughed it off before running away. The next day, Glenn still didn't take his classes seriously. He didn't care about keeping his promise to Sistine at all. One of the students asked him a question about magic because self-study wasn't working for her, and she wanted to understand better. But Sistine told Lynn not to ask Glenn for help because he didn't understand the greatness of magic. This made Glenn ask Sistine about the benefits of magic to humanity. He argued that fields like medicine or science could do the same things magic does. Sistine tried to defend magic, saying how amazing and truthful it was, but Glenn interrupted her and said that magic was only good for killing, explaining how effective it was in ending someone's life. This made Sistine super mad, and she slapped him before leaving the classroom crying. Nobody expected that to happen, and it shocked everyone. Later, Glenn went to the rooftop of the academy and reflected on his behavior. He and Sistine had different ideas about magic, and he probably looked down on her beliefs. He regretted upsetting her, even though he didn't admit it. He saw Rumia in the lab trying to practice magic on her own, so he went over to her. He wasn't happy about her using the lab without supervision, but he let her continue working on the magic circle she was creating. Rumia didn't know how to make it work, and Glenn told her it needed a lot of mercury. He got some and poured it onto the circuit, helping Rumia make her circle work. This got her really excited. After their experiment, Glenn and Rumia started talking. She asked him what he did before becoming a teacher. He said he was unemployed for a year and lived off of Celica. Rumia asked about what he did before that, but Glenn didn't want to talk about it. He started asking Rumia why she was interested in magic, and she said she wanted to repay a favor. She had been kidnapped by criminals years ago and was rescued by a powerful mage. That's why she wanted to learn more about magic. She also revealed that she had been living with Sistine and her family, who had been kind to her before they parted ways. In the evening, Rumia asked Glenn to apologize to Sistine because magic meant a lot to her, connecting her to her late grandfather. The next day, Glenn apologized to Sistine, admitting that his attitude was wrong, even though he didn't change his stance on magic and its usage. Everyone in the class was surprised, especially Sistine, who hadn't expected to hear those words from Glenn. Afterward, Glenn decided to teach the class how to use magic correctly because he realized they were doing it wrong. They were shocked because they didn't think he could do better than them, especially after his duel with Sistine. But Glenn used Shock Volt as an example and showed them how the way you cast the spell could affect the result. He demonstrated different results based on how he cast the spell, surprising everyone. Then he told them that magic was about studying the heart and mind and how they could influence the use of magic. He even showed them that he could use a shock bolt with just one word, which was super impressive. He explained that the books they had been using were just for memorizing magic, but before memorizing it, they should understand it first. This changed a lot of the students' minds about him as a teacher and as a mage. Days later, Glenn was becoming more popular at the academy. Students from other courses were now coming to his classes because they heard he was a great teacher. After finishing his day, he headed to the academy's rooftop, thinking that teaching wasn't so bad after all. There, Celica appeared and congratulated Glenn on his progress as a teacher. Glenn apologized for worrying her, and it made her smile. However, Celica informed him that she had to attend a meeting with all the staff at the academy, so Glenn's classroom would be the only one in use, and they needed to have extra classes. Just as Glenn's students arrived and were about to talk to him about magic, he noticed he was being followed. Glenn asked the stranger to introduce himself, and a guy named Carol appeared, trying to hurt Glenn. Meanwhile, in another scene, Class 2 was waiting for their teacher to arrive, thinking he was late again. However, 2 more criminals showed up, led by a guy named Ray. They were looking for Rumia and decided to take her with them and use the other students as hostages. It turned out that Ria was actually the princess of Alano, who everyone thought had died years ago. Back to Glenn, one of the criminals stayed with Sistine and planned to hurt her. He started to do bad things to her and made fun of her, saying she was acting tough. But then, Glenn suddenly appeared. The criminal tried to use magic to hurt Glenn, but it didn't work. Glenn had a special power called the Fool's World that could seal any magic in a certain area, making it disappear. He mentioned that it affected him too, so he couldn't use magic either. Then, Glenn beat up the criminal using army martial arts and easily defeated him. Glenn had actually defeated Carol with his bare fist before arriving at the academy. After Glenn defeated the criminal, he asked Sistine if she was okay. She started to tell him something, but he interrupted her, saying he shouldn't be a teacher with his dirty hands that he used to defeat the criminal. He felt like his hands were dirty, but then Sistine interrupted him and pointed out that his pants had fallen down, which made him feel embarrassed. Sistine then explained everything that had happened, how the criminals had taken Rumia and showed Glenn the arm of the tied-up criminal with a tattoo of the Divine Wisdom Organization. Glenn contacted Celica for help, but she revealed that the Divine Wisdom Organization was filled with evil mages and couldn't assist. Glenn requested backup desperately, but Celica explained that she had no authority and couldn't do anything. The academy was sealed, and Glenn was completely alone. Sistine realized they couldn't get any help and felt helpless. She tried to run away to look for Rumia, but Glenn stopped her, knowing that she couldn't do it alone, especially with dangerous criminals around. Sistine started to cry, Realizing that what Glenn had said about magic being used for evil was true, and bad people could do bad things with it, Glenn comforted her, promising to find the other criminals and save Rumia. The criminal they had tied up started laughing maniacally, claiming that Glenn was just like them, using magic for evil. But Sistine defended Glenn, saying he was a good person. Suddenly, several skeletal golems summoned by Ray appeared, and they attacked the criminal who was on their side. When the golems tried to attack Sistine and Glenn struggled to punch one because he wasn't using magic. Sistine helped him undo his nullifying magic, allowing him to use magic to defend themselves from the golems. They quickly ran away, but the golems followed them closely. Before they could go any further, Glenn asked Sistine to prepare a spell against the golems. Sistine used a blizzard spell, which managed to stop the golems. Glenn began preparing a powerful spell called Extinction Ray and released it, destroying all the golems and part of the academy. However, using such powerful magic left Glenn in bad condition. Ray entered the scene, and Glenn asked Sistine if she could cast a dispelling magic against Ray's weapons. But she needed time to regain her strength. Glenn pushed her into some bushes to fight alone. The duel with Ray began, and both displayed their abilities to end the fight quickly. Glenn tried to use a nullifying spell to stop Ray's swords, but it was already active, so he couldn't nullify it. He attempted another type of magic, and Ray tried to counter it. However, Glenn had tricked Ray, taking the attack head-on. Sistine then appeared, undoing Ray's spell, allowing Glenn to attack him with one of his own swords, defeating him. Ray remembered who Glenn was and revealed that Glenn was a mage killer who had worked for the Empire. After mentioning this, Ray died, and Glenn fell unconscious from blood loss. Sistine tried to heal him with magic. After several hours, Glenn woke up and found Sistine unconscious after using all her power. Celica called Glenn after trying to reach him multiple times. She asked about the situation, and Glenn explained that Ray had been defeated, but the barrier was still up. Celica explained that the barrier was designed to keep people inside, meaning the criminals were still in the school. Glenn realized that the teleportation circles were being rerouted by the criminals to allow them to escape without releasing the hostages. Glenn decided to go look for Rumia on his own and stop the criminals at the teleportation circles. After some time, he arrived at the tower where Rumia was held. There, he learned that the mastermind behind all of this was Huey, the teacher who had given up his position for Glenn. Glenn wanted to fight Huey, but Huey revealed that he had created a magic circle to teleport Rumia to their base. If Glenn wanted to save Rumia and the school, he had to stop playing games and undo the magic circle before time ran out. Glenn decided to use his own blood to break the circle, destroying each layer of the spell. However, when he reached the last layer, he ran out of mana. Rumia reached her hand out to touch Glenn, but the magic circle tried to stop her, hurting her finger in the process. Despite the pain, she managed to touch Glenn. Glenn saw this and realized that Rhea had the power to increase his mana. It turned out that Rhea was an amplifier, which meant she could do this. With her help, Glenn gained enough strength to destroy the magic circle. When he destroyed the circle, there was a bright light that spread throughout the school. Sistine saw this and knew where Glenn was. Afterward, Glenn confronted Huey and punched him, defeating him. Later, Glenn met with Celica, who revealed Rumia's true identity as the Empire's princess, someone who had faked her own death and was now living under a different name. Although Glenn wasn't surprised to hear this, he didn't really care about her identity or why she had faked her own death. When Celica asked him why he kept teaching at the school, Glenn admitted that he wanted to see the full potential of his students. After the academy was attacked, the news reached the royal family in the kingdom of Oano, where Rumia's mother was the queen. The queen had been deeply worried about Rhea. During the 3 years she had disappeared, some members of the kingdom were concerned about the news becoming public, but they advised the queen on how to handle the situation. However, when Rumia was found, the queen was overwhelmed with relief and happiness that her daughter was alive and safe. The next day in class, Rumia and Sistine were trying to get their fellow students to sign up for a competition. However, the students didn't seem interested and lacked confidence in their magic skills. They were worried about humiliating themselves in front of the queen, who was rumored to be attending. Some students didn't even want to compete at all. Rumia and Sistine made their best efforts to motivate the students and convey the significance of the competition as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But their attempts were in vain. Suddenly, Glenn burst through the doors full of confidence and claiming to know how to inspire the students. He took charge, much to the girls' skepticism. Glenn assured the students that they would win the competition. He assigned them into categories and groups based on their abilities and strengths. Some students initially disagreed with Glenn's classifications, but he went on to praise their abilities while pointing out their weaknesses. This made them realize the value of their unique skills and how they could contribute to the competition. In the end, the students were impressed by Glenn's understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. Rumia and Sistine were also pleased with how Glenn had taken the initiative to get to know the students better and help them prepare for the competition. Despite their earlier disagreements, they began to see a different side of Glenn and appreciated his efforts to support the students. In the back of his mind, Glenn was quite impressed with how well he had been doing as a teacher lately. He realized that he had made a good impression on his students ever since he started taking his teaching job seriously. However, at the same time, he knew that he was broke and couldn't afford to live comfortably at the moment. So Glenn decided to approach the headmaster and begged for an allowance or some kind of advance to help with his financial situation. Both the headmaster and Celica had mustaches, figuratively speaking, meaning they were both quite stern. They didn't want Glenn to receive any help from the outside. They wanted him to take responsibility for himself and make the most of what he already had. However, Glenn wasn't ready to give up. He believed that Celica was partly responsible for him ending up at the academy in the first place, so he kept pleading with them. The headmaster then mentioned a bonus opportunity that caught Glenn's attention. The teacher of the class that won the magic competition would receive compensation for instructing the best class. Glenn eagerly accepted this opportunity, primarily motivated by the potential reward rather than a genuine concern for his students. One of the students in his class didn't agree with how Glenn had organized them for the competition and suggested using only the best students to maximize their chances of winning. Glenn was secretly intrigued by this idea but couldn't openly support it. Sistine stood up for Glenn and defended his approach, emphasizing teamwork and utilizing all the students' abilities. During recess, Glenn stood outside pondering the upcoming competition and how other classes might use only their best students. He watched his students from different classes begin competing, even within their friend groups, about who would perform better. A fight broke out over the practice space, but Glenn intervened to stop it. Then, a student named Harley approached and questioned why Glenn's class hadn't reserved the practice spot. Harley held a strong grudge against Glenn due to his tardiness and irresponsibility. Glenn and Harley exchanged words, with Harley expressing hostility and telling Glenn to take his class elsewhere. Glenn instructed his students to practice near a tree, making do with the limited space. Harley continued to mock Glenn's decision to involve the entire class in the competition, believing that only the best students should participate, as they did in previous years. This upset Glenn, and he decided to bet his entire 3-month salary on his class winning, despite having doubts in the back of his mind. Harley, confident in himself and his students, accepted the bet and also wagered his own 3-month salary on the competition. Glenn wasn't entirely convinced by his own decision, but he felt compelled to take the risk given his financial situation. Sistine stepped in and stood up to Harley, telling him that he had no authority over the training grounds and that anyone could practice there. She even threatened to complain to the school board if Harley and his students kept bothering them. Harley and his group eventually backed down, leaving with a parting promise that Glenn's class wouldn't stand a chance against them. Sistine then motivated the other students, assuring them that with Glenn on their side, they could win the competition. This filled the students with confidence and excitement. In the days leading up to the competition, Glenn took his job seriously. He worked hard to train the students and help them study magic, making sure they improved their skills and got good grades. Winning the competition meant a lot to him, especially because he needed the prize money. Rumia and Sistine watched him from a distance, admiring his dedication. They couldn't help but feel that he had become the coolest professor ever. Despite C's initial reservations about him, the night before the competition, Rumia stood on the balcony, remembering the tragic day her family was killed. She held a pendant in her hand, a reminder of her family. Even though she couldn't recall much about them, Sistine noticed what Rumia was holding but didn't press her on it. Instead, they focused on the upcoming competition and the need to practice hard to win. Sistine couldn't help but worry about Rumia, who might feel sad about not having her parents there like the other kids would. However, Rumia assured Sistine that she knew her real parents and that Sis's parents were like family to her. This eased Sis's concerns, and they both decided to have dinner with their parents. During dinner, their parents apologized for not being able to attend the competition due to other commitments. The girls reassured them that it was okay, but their father got emotional, thinking they were angels for forgiving him so easily. The day of the competition arrived, and the queen made her way to the event, hoping to catch a glimpse of her daughter from a distance. She had changed her pendant to one that looked similar to Rumia's and wore a different necklace. Before the competition began, the queen offered some words to bless the event. Rumia noticed that the queen had a pendant similar to hers once the competition started. The students from various classes began to compete. To everyone's surprise, one of Glenn's students from Class 2 managed to secure third place. This got the other students from Class 2 excited. Glenn himself was quite shocked but hopeful. However, Class 1, led by Harley, started to mock them for their third-place ranking. Harley eventually intervened and suggested they let Class 2 enjoy their moment. Class 2 students became motivated and confident with Glenn by their side. But Glenn couldn't help feeling a bit uneasy. He was also quite hungry and realized that it was hard to stay motivated on an empty stomach. Celica, sitting next to the queen, teased Class 2 for their surprising performance. The queen asked Celica if Glenn was truly special, to which Celica replied that he had a knack for coming up with impressive ideas. As the competition progressed, Class 2 continued to excel and win their rounds, putting them in a favorable position. Glenn was impressed by how well his class was doing, and he hoped to win so that he wouldn't have to give his salary to Harley. Now it was Ria's turn in the mental defense competition. One student from Class 5 tried to intimidate Rumia, thinking she couldn't handle it. But Ria was determined to do her part for her class. One student from Class 2 suspected Glenn of sacrificing Rumia because she excelled in healing magic but was chosen for mental defense. However, Glenn assured him that Rumia was mentally strong, which pleased C. The mental defense competition began, and the students faced a professor who was also the master of mental defense. The professor used his mental manipulation magic to quickly eliminate several students. Only Rumia and the student from Class 5 remained. However, the professor's perverted comments about Rumia's appearance disgusted many, including the headmaster, who threatened to fire him. In the final round called Mind Break, Rumia and the Class 5 student faced off. The student from Class 2, who had doubted Rumia earlier, was impressed by her mental fortitude. However, the magic they endured in this round was excruciating for both mind and body. Rumia began to falter and kneel, but the Class 5 student remained standing. Glenn and C encouraged Rumia to quit, as it was clear she was in pain. They praised her for her perseverance but insisted on her safety. However, before they could intervene further, it was revealed that the Class 5 student was unconscious despite standing, making Rumia the winner by default. Class 2 emerged as the winners of the competition, and the students were overjoyed. They celebrated their victory, and even the queen, Rumia's real mother, was thrilled to see her daughter happy. The queen had abandoned Rumia but was content just knowing her daughter was happy. Celica urged the queen to talk to Rumia if only for today. Two characters, Ree and Albert, appear, discussing Glenn's abandonment of the imperial court to become a teacher. One of them wants to confront Glenn, but the other reminds them that their mission to protect the queen from a suspicious guard is more important. They decide it's a one-person job. During a break, Glenn watches the students enjoying their lunches and snacks, wishing he could join them. However, he's very hungry and can't afford it. Len approaches Glenn and asks to switch out of the transmutation competition, fearing she'll perform poorly. Glenn encourages her to have fun and explains the spell to her. He even transforms into Rumia to demonstrate the spell, impressing Len. He assures her to do her best and that he'll handle anyone who gives her a hard time. Sistine rushes to Glenn, thinking he's Rumia, and offers him food. Glenn can't resist and tries to eat, but Rumia arrives and uses her magic to turn him back into himself. Sistine hits him with her magic, and he ends up in the bushes, feeling embarrassed. Rumia brings Glenn a lunchbox, saying someone special made it for him. She doesn't reveal who, but it's implied to be Sistine. Glenn remains oblivious to the fact that he might be the jerk mentioned and thanks Rumia before heading back to the competition. The queen unexpectedly appears, surprising Glenn, who used to work as her guard. She apologizes for how he left his job, and they chat briefly. Glenn asks why she's there without her guards, but she doesn't answer. Instead, she addresses Rumia as Uniana, mistaking her for someone else. Rumia apologizes for the confusion and rushes back to the competition. The queen leaves and asks Glenn to take care of Rumia at the competition. The queen is surrounded by her guards, and General Commander Zos approaches her, apologizing and requesting her to come with them. The mysterious characters reappear, and one suggests they wait for the right moment to charge their enemies with a full frontal assault. Class 2 continues to dominate the competition, winning another event. Glenn, however, is distracted, thinking about the former princess who was erased from existence due to her special power. Sistine approaches him, worried about Rumia's absence. Glenn promises to find her and leaves Sistine to handle things while he's gone. Before he departs, they playfully discuss the delicious sandwiches from earlier, causing Sistine to blush. Glenn finds Rumia sitting alone under a tree, holding an empty locket from the other night. She wonders if it's weird to hold onto a locket with nothing inside. Glenn reassures her that what it means to her matters more than what's inside. Rumia asks if he knows the truth, if he believes she and the queen are related as mother and daughter. Glenn says yes. Rumia shares her understanding of why the queen abandoned her due to the curse she was born with, but she can't forgive her completely. Even though part of her wants to call her mother, she also thinks about Sistine's parents who raised her as their own, not wanting to betray them. Glenn tells her that people often have regrets no matter what decision they make and advises her to do what will make her happy. He asks what she wants, but she's unsure. He recounts his time serving the kingdom as a mage under the queen and how he noticed the locket always meant so much to her. He suggests Rumia starts with the locket and tells the queen how she feels. She's scared and asks him to accompany her, to which he agrees. Suddenly, Imperial guards arrive and accuse Rumia of conspiring to assassinate the queen. They try to execute her immediately. Glenn steps in, but they warn him to stay away. They inform him that the order came from the queen herself. Rumia surrenders, but Glenn questions the lack of a trial. When he tries to protest, they strike him with their swords and tie Rumia to a tree. Rumia accepts her fate, knowing this day was supposed to have passed. A blinding light appears, taking down the guards. Glenn arrives to rescue her. Rumia worries that he might have hurt the guards, but Glenn reassures her it's just a blinding light hurting their eyes. More guards appear, and Glenn uses his magic to save them both. They run on the rooftops to find a hiding spot. Glenn contacts Celica to find out the situation, but she can't help and tells him he's on his own. As he contemplates a solution, the two mysterious characters reappear and rush towards him with their swords. Glenn seems to recognize them. After talking to Celica, Alina reveals that she placed a special collar on the queen, which is actually the necklace Rumia possesses. This collar has the power to kill the queen if she rebels against the leaner. The only way to break this spell is to kill Rumia. Glenn realizes he's the only one capable of saving the queen. Suddenly, Albert and Rhea appear in front of Glenn. Rel attacks him with a sword, forcing Glenn to defend himself. However, Albert intervenes by striking Rel, and Glenn scolds her. Glenn explains that Albert and Rel belong to the court, an organization that serves the kingdom. Both Celica and Glenn were once members. The two of them explain the situation regarding the queen and Celica. After a chat, Glenn asks his former colleagues for help, revealing his plan to present himself to the queen and trust Celica to handle the rest. They agree to assist him. As Glenn and Rumia evade the queen's guards, Albert and Reed decide to return to the stadium. They inform Class 2 that they will guide them to victory. At first, the students are skeptical of these new teachers who are total strangers. However, when Albert and Rel relay Glenn's message, the students realize they can trust them. They decide to win the competition for themselves and ensure Glenn doesn't tease them if they lose in his absence. The students of Class 2 start winning several games, tying the score with Class 1. Lynn excels in her transmutation magic competition, tying with Class 1 as well. Everything comes down to a final duel, with Sistine fighting her opponent using magic. After a few minutes of struggle, Sistine manages to defeat her opponent, leading Class 2 to victory in the competition. After the competition, Albert and Rhea approach Alicia to receive the medal. However, they shock everyone by revealing their true identities. Glenn and Rumia had switched bodies with Albert and Rhea, leaving the Imperial guards confused. Celica quickly sets up a protective barrier to keep the guards at bay. Glenn starts questioning their intentions regarding Rumia. Zealous informs them that Rumia must die to save the queen and her people. Alicia surprisingly gives the order for Rumia to be executed, leaving both Rumia and Glenn in shock. Glenn had initially thought the queen wanted to save Rumia in a different way, but now he realizes she can't tell the truth. Rumia is devastated by Alicia's words. However, Glenn sees through the deception and attacks Zealous, knocking him down. Alicia then removes Elena's collar, as Glenn had managed to deactivate the curse using Fool's World magic. After this, Alicia hugs Rumia, apologizes, and reveals her true feelings, leading Rumia to accept her. Meanwhile, Albert and Rhea encounter Elena, who reveals she now belongs to the Divine WI system. Before they can do anything, Elena escapes using her magic, putting an end to the conflict. Later, Glenn and Rumia have a private conversation where it's revealed that the powerful mage who saved Rumia in the past was actually Glenn himself. The queen had asked him to rescue her daughter when she was kidnapped. To celebrate their victory, Glenn and Rumia join the other students at a restaurant. However, Glenn realizes that they've spent all the money they recently earned, which saddens him. The next morning, Glenn and Sistine kickstart the day with some intense hand-to-hand combat training. Sistine is a bit frustrated because she was hoping for more magic training. But when Glenn explains that he's preparing her to protect Rumia, she understands and appreciates his efforts. Later, Rumia and Sistine come across Glenn, who looks pretty tired. While chatting, they suddenly encounter Ree charging at Glenn with her heavy sword. Ree announces that she's going to be Rumia's new bodyguard and has infiltrated as a new student in Glenn's class. However, she's not interested in guarding Rumia. She wants to protect Glenn instead. Glenn firmly tells her that her duty is to protect Rumia, scolding her for her refusal. Glenn then introduces Ree to all her new classmates. She struggles with socializing and answering simple questions, but Glenn helps her out. In an unexpected twist, Ree confesses that she's in love with Glenn, leaving the girls excited and the boys dismayed. During magic practice, Sistine gives it her all. When it's Ree's turn, she struggles with using the shock volt spell properly. She can't hit her target with precision, so she asks to use a different spell. She demonstrates an alchemy spell that creates a large, heavy sword, impressing and frightening the other students by throwing it accurately at the target. As Ree tries to adapt to her new student life, she hangs out and eats lunch with Sistine and Rumia to assure her that she can take it slow and enjoy her meals because she's no longer in the military but in school. Over time, she forms a strong friendship with Sistine and Rumia, which makes Glenn happy. A little while later, Glenn catches up with Celica, and they discuss how Ree has been fitting in with her fellow students. Celica suggests that teachers should also help students with social skills, and Glenn agrees, planning to make the upcoming field trip enjoyable for the students. Days later, Class 2 gets ready for a field trip to the Senia Islands, where they will visit an alchemy laboratory on the island. Glenn encounters a strange vendor who turns out to be Albert. Albert mentions that he is the real guardian of Rumia and warns Glenn to be cautious of Ree, as she can be very dangerous. Glenn doesn't pay too much attention, thinking that the past should stay in the past, but Albert advises him to be careful. Later, the class has fun at the beach, playing volleyball and enjoying their vacation together. Glenn joins in the volleyball game with his students, and they all have a great time. In the evening, Ree is with the girls, watching Glenn and the boys goofing around and trying to peek into the girls' hotel rooms. She's surprised to see Glenn having so much fun because he used to be gloomy at the academy. The girls invite Rel to play cards with them, and she joins. Sistine and Rumia are happy to see her fitting in well. Later at night, Rel confronts Glenn and asks him why he left the court. She claims to know the reason but doesn't understand why he had to go. This is the end. Subscribe for the next part.